before we move on into specifics, I want to make sure that I'm clear on the purpose of formative assessment. Formative assessment is not just so that you can get more data, and especially not so that you can just have more grades in your grade book. I'm not saying here that instead of having 1 or 2 tests in a unit, you now have 1 or 2 tests and 15 quizzes in your grade book. That's not the purpose of formative assessment, just to give you more grades. In fact, you should not grade most or any of your formative assessment items. Once you start grading things, students start changing their mindset about them, especially as they move on up into middle school and high school. Instead of being willing to try and not being worried if they don't know something, once they know there's a grade involved, they tend to start thinking, okay, what's the right answer that my teacher wants? Or they start trying to game the system. If I write enough meaningless but flowery language in my essay, I'll get a good grade. Remember that formative assessment deals with the time of practice for the students to help them in the learning process. They're not expected to know everything right off the bat. If they did, you wouldn't need to teach it. So, for example, if you use an exit ticket, don't think that you have to put a grade on it. Same thing with homework. Now, I don't have time to get in here into the whole issue of grading homework. There's a significant school of thought that says we should not grade homework at all, either for correctness or for completion. But that's another discussion. My point here is that you don't have to grade everything the students do for formative assessment. Now you might think, well, then the students are just going to blow it off. It's not important. They won't even try. Some do. And in fact, most of them might when you first start giving them things that you don't grade. But you should explain what your purpose is in giving the assignment. Something like, this is just so you can get more practice trying out this new learning. If you don't get them all right, that's okay. But this is so you can show me what you're doing well on and what you still need help on. Or you can be more specific with the students. You might say, I want to see if you are able to recognize informal logical fallacies. We're going to be looking at some newspaper editorials later, and the exercises for homework here are to help you get better at recognizing fallacies before we dig into those editorials. Then you can tell the students what you're going to do with the assignment when you get it back. You can say something like, when you come back tomorrow, I'm going to look over your work and find the 3 most common mistakes that you're making, and we'll spend the first 15 minutes of class going over those to be sure you understand. Now that means then that you need to remember that one of the expected results of formative assessment is that you're going to adjust your instruction as a result of that assessment. I mean, if you collect an exit ticket and see that most of your class misunderstood the concept of using alternate interior angles to determine whether lines are parallel, then you need to revisit that concept the next day. You can't just give them that exit ticket and take that formative assessment and just move along as if you'd never done it. For one thing, if the students realize that your formative assessment activities make no difference at all, I mean they're not graded and they don't affect instruction, then they will quickly stop taking them seriously. But if the students see that you use formative assessment to adjust your teaching, that if a student shows that she doesn't understand something, then you're going to try to address it, they're more likely to take the formative assessment seriously. Besides, if you're not going to adjust your instruction based on it, you're just wasting time giving exit tickets, using student response systems, or whatever else you might do. Now what this means is you have to be flexible with your lesson plans. And I know for some of you this is going to be difficult because some of you are the type of teacher who has every lesson plan for the entire year worked out in detail before school starts in August. You're going to need to recognize that if the students don't really understand a concept, then the next day you need to deal with that in some way, even if it throws your lesson plans off. But now this doesn't mean do away with lesson plans. I mean, don't start thinking, well, why plan? If every day I'm just reacting to what happened the day before, there's no point in coming up with detailed plans. No, you still need to plan your lessons, daily, weekly, even yearly. You see, if you have those plans, you might know that a particular concept is going to be addressed again in a few days. So you can just kind of file that away mentally. And you can think, okay, we're going to come back to alternate interior angles in 2 days. So then I can focus on those things that they missed today. And if you have the overall scope and sequence plan in mind for your course, you might realize there are some lessons coming up which you can gloss over or eliminate altogether. In geometry, while a lesson on tessellation might be good, you realize it's not essential for future learning, so you can just leave it out when the time comes if you need to. That allows you to spend an extra day on the current difficult and more crucial concept. You can also include some flex time in your lesson plans. Often, if you've done a good job of explaining some concept, you'll find that it won't take long to correct misunderstandings the next day. So just kind of set aside 5 to 10 minutes of class each day to deal with those errors. That way it won't wreck your whole plan. And it might be that you see that only a few students need more explanation. So instead of dealing with it during whole class instruction, you might just work with those few students at the end of class when the rest of the students are getting started on the evening's homework. Besides, if you engage in formative assessment regularly and consistently, you'll be dealing with relatively small misunderstandings and errors at the time when they're best addressed. You can spend 5 minutes reviewing the idea of alternate interior angles one day and then they know it. Or you could not do it. You can get to the end of the unit, give a unit test, and then see that the students really never understood alternate interior angles. And you know that's crucial for what you're going to do in the next unit. So then you have to spend a day or two going back over it, reteaching the lessons. That takes more time overall than if you had dealt with the problem at the time. So in our next session, we're going to start looking at some specific methods of effective formative assessment. We've looked at the principles involved, and so now we can start looking at some specifics. In the meantime, if you have questions, please drop me a note.